So this is about the quality assurance model. This, bearing in mind, we'll go back historically and we'll talk about things that have happened, and we'll also reflect on where we are now and what the plan is for September. So it's kind of a talk through that, really. So the background to it, 2014, 4 schools, and 2019, 24, which we all know, and we know about that rapid growth. In 2017, Jet and I took up post within that executive model, which was 2 executive heads, 1 senior executive head, and thinking about what those roles were. And actually, for the first year, support really overshadowed quality assurance. There was an awful lot of support provided by all of us to the schools. And it's about that knowingness. It's about when we're obviously held accountable by trustees and they ask the right questions, and it's about us knowing the answers to those questions. 2018 Key Stage 2 SATs results were below national in reading, round national in writing and maths, and established trust schools were principally the ones where the data dropped the most. So again, it's a question about why is that? Is that because the quality assurance isn't right? Is it because the deployment of our school improvement service isn't right? And what are the implications of that? There was an opportunity to restructure the executive team upon Jeanette's retirement, and at the same time, because it's changing and because it's good practice to rethink your organisational objectives at the same time as actually thinking about what roles you need to fulfil those, we reflected on the quality assurance and then looked at a model of quality assurance from the exec team and then brokerage of support through ESIT or through quality teacher partners. Which is the point below about ESIT role, the deployment of them. And we reflected and thought, well, actually, we can't be flexible in the way that we would wish to be in ESIT deployment with the model as it was. We weren't meeting regularly enough, and we weren't feeding back regularly enough on what we were seeing in the schools. We've got a very successful external school-to-school model, and it wasn't necessarily being used to support our own schools, which was another thing factored in. And in 2017, back to the bullet point 2 about the support, 12 of our 18 heads have been in the role for less than 2 years. So in terms of designing the strategy, it involved a research of MAT school improvement strategies and specifically looking at what they do for QA, period of consultation, using staff other than ESIT for quality assurance, so that evolved into a model of consultative head teachers principally, and then seek out and evaluate research into effective quality assurance systems from both the world of education and the wider commercial world, which was really interesting from my point of view, looking at what quality assurance looks like in the commercial world. When you search it, you end up with lots of stuff about how baked beans come out really, really, really well. It's not about people. It's really interesting. There's hardly anything about quality assurance about what people are doing in the job. The strategy would then be finalised and presented to trustees in time for its adoption from September 2019. So now, as we sit in June, we have a plan, and it's ready to be rolled out and fully implemented from September 2019. So, talk to the heads. Talked about that issue about the case for change, the support v challenge aspects, and the support v quality assurance, and the need for that to happen. Performance and Effectiveness Committee were keen that the information that we were providing was headline information and it was easily interpreted. So again, that feeds into what we need to find out. And then I researched MATs, again, really interesting, the different models that are around. So the first one, with absolutely huge deficit, I think there were 6 schools in the MAT, and collectively there were 22 million deficit. Now, it was a secondary trust. So you think about the motives for re-evaluating the quality assurance from their point of view, and obviously financial is going to be a huge part of the motive. But interestingly, what they had was a model of old-style local authority advisors who hadn't been in the system for quite a long time. And they reflected, and it struck me as the strength of our system that is core really to our trust. They reflected that the advisors should be replaced by doers, which is exactly what we've got. But the ethos wasn't the same. It was very driven by that financial necessity, but also just about data. It was about data improvement. There was no quality assurance of teaching and learning that was talked about in that research at all, which I thought was really interesting. So that idea that you've got to build professional capacity and knowledge and skill wasn't factored into the quality assurance. But learning points from that were more regular ESIT meetings and the balance between knowingness and deployment, because it made me think they're not doing that. That they're just looking at data for the knowingness. They're not looking at the quality of teaching and learning. They're not looking at the quality of their heads. They're not looking at anything that's that qualitative data. They're looking purely at the numbers. But we do. We look at all those things. We've got a lot of knowingness about our schools. So that should feed into the deployment of support teams. In order for that to happen flexibly, we needed to meet more often. So ESIT team now meets once a month, so that we can feed in our knowingness and then deploy effectively. The second map that I looked at was much more a done with model, and it much more closely aligned with our approach. But there was much greater use of traditional system leaders. So, for example, SLEs. They deployed SLEs who went into schools, told the school how to do it, and left, like the old local authority model. And while we're always looking to develop, I think we do get some things, quite a lot of things right as a trust. And that aspect, again, really struck me. We're not about that. We're about doing with, helping, coming back and seeing how we've got on, and then what's the next stage. But actually working with the schools. So from that came a core offer around quality assurance, or a core expectation around quality assurance, and establishing a peer review for each school. That map does do that peer review idea, yearly. So again, adopted that within the strategy so that we can really dig down into a school at least once a year and reflect on the quality assurance that's going on and compare that to what it says about the day in the life of a child in whatever school it might be. Talk to ESIT members about this, not as a group but individually, quite a lot as we were going through. And they reflected on hands-on deployment and referenced All Saints and the impact that that had had, and said, why don't we do this more? Well, the answer is £40,000. But it was really interesting because they know when it works. And if you listen to your people that know when it works, you can develop a strategy that's based on what works. Consider the use of the school improvement log, which is what we currently use, versus a document suite for each school, so it's a layered spreadsheet. Pros and cons, we've not finalised what we're doing with that yet, but I think there are uses for both. I think they genuinely are both useful, having used both over the last few months. I think they're both useful for different things. And then development of a bank of people that we can use to support strategic improvement, so consultant head teachers, LLEs, and then the professional partners for the on-the-ground practical working. The QA research findings, clear success criteria, you need to know what you're trying to find out. Peer review, vital component in the whole process. And no matter whether you look at industry or education, that really comes out as a really important part of making quality assurance work, because you find out so much through peer review. Every user a tester. It highlights the importance of feedback from a wide range of stakeholders. QA should be directed at the points of highest vulnerability. So again, that was an industry system, industry observation, which I thought was very interesting from an educational point of view. That translates into we're as strong as the weakest child in the weakest school, doesn't it? That's what we mean by that. Recording and reporting procedures, most information in the minimum amount of time to digest them, and that is always a battle. You know, what do you need as a minimum to get the key information across? And that goes back to that development of the document suite, or whether the SI log does what we need it to do. More impactful than quantity, so quality of QA, that dip check idea, measuring the pig must lead to the pig putting on weight. Okay? So you've got to really go in depth into things in schools, but you can't do that for everything. So it goes back to the point of vulnerability. I was going to use the pointer, I'm going to use the pointer now. You've got to look at the vulnerability, measure that, and then add value where you're vulnerable. And then a plan, do, check, act model, that idea of cyclical moving through that process. So impact so far, in terms of as this quality assurance model has developed, would seem to be positive. Now, I completely recognise this is not all about our quality assurance model, but what it is doing, hopefully, is contributing towards the improvement in progress. But I think, interestingly, if you look at maths data, that dipped in December. And then that had implications for where we deployed ESET, because the quality assurance fed from that, and it all made a picture. We were then able to deploy more effectively and more strategically. So that turned into an offer that's fundamentally this. So your head teacher performance management forms part of your quality assurance, along with Visit 1, which is about your SEF and your school development plan. So getting the strategy right was important. Peer review in the middle. As identified before, it's a key element in quality assurance, making sure that you dig deep for a period of time and look really hard and make sure that what your top level quality assurance is telling you is actually the case. You see it lived out in the school. And then Visit 2, that importance of the Cycle 2 data, head teacher performance management, including that end of year outcome. So again, focusing on those outcomes is important, but hopefully you're getting great outcomes because your quality assurance is right, telling us that you're working on the right things in your schools in the right ways, the effective ways, which then leads to better outcomes. Any questions or feedback?
Yeah, I've got a question, Dave. I was interested in the comment from the ESET team around hands-on deployment and why don't we do this more? And what we know about the All Saints model was that they went as a team. I was interested in whether you felt they said, why don't we do this more? Was that why aren't we deployed for a set amount of time in a school more? Or do they mean, why don't we work as a team in there more? Because I think there's two separate elements to that.
You're right. My interpretation of it is they meant as a team.
Right, okay.
Yeah, they didn't mean they should be in a school more.
Yes.
It was more
so
collectively
actually it was about the fact that they were there as a team that was more effective rather than the long-term deployment of a person.
Yes, it offered a coordinated approach. Yes. So things like messages, methods were all the same. Because one of the issues that you do get coming back sometimes is that ESET will come back and say, well, schools are saying they're getting mixed messages, not necessarily from ESET, but from schools sometimes say, well, the message is different than it was a year ago. Well, yes, of course it is, because it's a year ago. You know, we're all developing, aren't we?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And any thought about, in a way, what you're exemplifying is the immersion model. It's the model that we know that's worked in external school-to-school support, which has had great impact because they're a team that are talking about the interconnectivity of all the things that they are doing. If you mirror that to a teacher partner model, where you are deploying not just the ESET team, or you're deploying expert practitioners, is there some thought of whether that needs to be more team-driven rather than individual-driven?
Yeah, so currently we have a project that's doing exactly that in a school in East Riding. Yesterday and the day before, English and Maths leads went together and worked with the English and Maths leads from that school together.
Right.
And it's effective, and you can see the effectiveness because they've already written the notes of visit. But that box at the bottom, which is next steps and how, is very, very tight between the two coordinators. So the principles are the same, albeit the subjects are different. So you're going to get more consistency through the school.
I mean, it's exciting in terms of learning what works well, and the danger is always slipping into old models, isn't it, of advisory rather than doing as a team.
Yes. So the coordination of them going in at the same time where possible is, I think, a vital part of the deployment.
From the All Saints experience, you asked the ESET team on their views of going in as a team. Did you ask the school about their views on receiving a team? And did you evaluate how going in as a team would impact versus going in as individual support?
Yeah, so as part of every project we've run, whether it be All Saints, which is more of an internal, albeit they're not our school, it's more of an EBOR kind of arrangement, and also external school to schools, all of them are evaluated by external agencies. So in the case of All Saints, it's the local authority. You get the joint monitoring visit, which then reflects on the effectiveness of the support, so that is positive in terms of the impact that that's had. Yeah.
And feedback from the staff at the school themselves?
Almost overwhelmingly positive. Through the whole school-to-school experience that I've had for the last 2 years, there are very, very few members of staff that have been worked with, because I think that's the key to it, is that professional partner model, who are negative about what's happened. I can honestly only think of 2 members of staff where they've been negative, and one of those was when I was a team leader actually in school before I joined Trust.
When you've been in and done the peer reviews, what have you built in for afterwards? For example, if you do find problems, issues, whatever, based on the lack of resource that we've got, because we've just talked about, and how stretched the ESIT team are, what have you, because you don't want it to just be a quality assurance, you want to then be able to do something about it. So have you built that in, and
Yes.
how have you built that in?
So at the bottom of the peer review, there are a series of action points. Now, if the school's doing well, those action points are left to the SLT in the school to work on and assimilate into the school development planning. If the school are vulnerable for whatever reason, that translates then into a post review action plan, which is then carefully planned with an exec or a consultative leader or the exec or consultative and the head teacher. Again, it's done with, and that plan is set out for who's coming in, what they're going to support with, and when they're going to do it, and a series of milestones that are associated. And it's then reviewed again within an agreed time limit. Depending on what they need to do, it needs to be flexible, because obviously some things take longer than others.
Sometimes, if it hasn't been particularly an issue, or it's more of a development rather than a problem, actually we've looked at other staff in other schools and we've partnered them up more of a teacher partner model rather than ESIT deployment.
Yes.
So we've looked at expertise within, so school to school, rather than more of a school improvement team.
That's exactly it. And you I would say we've used ESIT probably more than the teacher partners, but as this evolves, it will be more use of teacher partners than it is ESIT. Well, the support's there.
The other consideration I was having when I was listening was whether we consult with our heads as part of the peer review. And I know we've reviewed and evaluated and reflected on how many people we use as part of our peer reviews, and actually this present time is just us as a pair. But whether actually heads would do a peer review with us in another school across the trust. So every head joined the exec for a peer review in a different school, because then it would be you'd benefit it as part of your own school's development, but also you'd benefit as part of your own CPD to be part of that reviewing process in another school. I'd be interested to know what other school heads would think about
It's a good idea what you've just said about the follow-up, because I think with the old LA model, it was a case of coming in and saying that's not right, but then what happened after? Not a lot sometimes. So I think that follow-up is the most important thing, but also that would be a really good idea for CPD for the heads.